Here is a great daily routine to keep you loose and to keep you pretty much injury and pain free. The focus is on actually maximizing motion at both your hips and your shoulders, so then that way your spine feels great, your knees feel great, and every other part of your body feels great. I like to partake in a daily routine myself, and that actually allows me to feel loose and ready for action. You're gonna need one piece of equipment, which is going to be a foam roller, which is one of my favorite pieces to use. So we're gonna start off with actually rolling out our upper back, also known as the thoracic spine rollout. We're gonna have the roller run east and west in relation to our body. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna place it onto the floor. You are gonna get onto your butt and onto your back with your knees bent so you can actually control yourself. Shoulder blades were right on top, and you're gonna keep your head elevated using your hands. And you might end up feeling a couple pops and cracks, but that's totally okay. And you can actually give yourself a little bit more of a stretch by pulling your chin to your chest. And the goal is to keep your elbows straight up to the ceiling. You can add a little bit more pressure by letting your hips come up off the floor. Spend about 90 seconds to be able to really get deep into those tissues and deep into those joints. From there, it's time to move to our hips. So you're gonna go ahead and stand up. You're gonna place your hands on your hips, and you can identify your hips by lifting your legs up and identifying where is that axis of rotation. Once you find that axis of rotation, you're gonna go a total of 20 steps. And this gives you an opportunity to help find your hip joints and warm them up and get the blood flowing. From here, we're gonna move our feet out a little bit wider. So we'll say outside shoulders width, and we're gonna go a wide stance squat. You're gonna keep your hands on your hips, turn your feet out maybe to like 1 and 11 o'clock. You are going to sit your hips back, and you're gonna drive your knees out, and you're gonna stand on back up. You're gonna go ahead and focus on sitting those hips back as you lean that torso forward. And as you can see, my shins are pretty vertical. Now, it's not a bad thing to let those knees come forward, but we're really prioritizing moving our hips and making sure that our back is staying relatively straight. From here, you're gonna go ahead and send your hips back. You can actually let yourself shift side to side, and it's gonna look like this from this angle. Shift your weight side to side. Keep your heels down on the floor, and you're gonna go ahead and stand back up. You're gonna go about 10 to 15 repetitions. From there, we're gonna get into what is called the inchworm. The inchworm is gonna be prioritizing our hips and hamstrings. So you're gonna have your feet about shoulders width apart. You're gonna bend your knees. You're gonna stick your hips out as far as you can. You're gonna reach to the floor. Once your hamstrings stop you from going down, you can bend your knees a little bit more. You're gonna walk into a plank. And then from here, you're gonna drive your hips up into a downward facing dog, and then you're gonna get back into a plank. And then from here, you're gonna walk those hands on back. So I like to call it an inchworm into a downward facing dog. Great way to get those hips and shoulders nice and active. So we go into a plank, bend the knees, push the hips back, and then you're gonna walk your hands on back. And you're gonna go about 5 to 10 repetitions just like that. One thing to keep of note, as I was walking forward, my heel does elevate from the floor, giving you an opportunity to actually move at the hip and pivot at the foot, and not really worrying too much about the length of your hamstrings. The great thing is the fact that all of this is actually going to improve blood flow in your hips and your hamstrings. You actually don't necessarily need to stretch your hamstrings in particular, especially if you happen to be a pretty flexible person. From there, we are going to be moving on to our our last stretch, which is going to be the ninja complex. And it's a combination of a side lunge and a forward lunge. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna have your feet pretty wide. As you can see, I'm probably going about a foot outside of my shoulder. I'm going to sit my hips back, and this is what we call a Cossack squat. You'll feel a stretch in the trailing leg. You're gonna go ahead and take your hands. You're gonna then walk yourself into a deep lunge. You can keep your knee up or you can keep your knee down, player's choice. And as you can see, my heel is up from the floor, and then I'm gonna come here. I'm gonna walk my hands back to the other side so I can get into a side lunge, and then I get into a deep lunge, again, heel up. Your goal is to go about 5 per side, and gives you an opportunity to stretch out your inner thighs as well as your hips. And this is going to be more of like a maintenance and daily routine. And as you can see, I'm not really holding these positions for a long period of time. I'm actually going into active motions. From the side, just so that you can kind of get a reference, I'm actually sitting my hips far back as possible. See how far my torso leans forward? And that actually allows me to focus on making sure that I'm moving at the level of the hip versus the level of my spine. So I want you to keep that in mind. This, all in all, should take about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how quickly and how much you do. But I would say give yourself an opportunity to really feel these positions so you can feel like $1,000,000 bucks.